All right, ready to dive deep. Today, it's ancient India, specifically the Vedic era.
Ah, yes, a period that still echoes in Indian culture even today.
It's where so much began, right? Like the foundations, the building blocks of Indian literature, thought, religion, even society.
You could say it's the DNA of Indian culture.
So where do we even begin to unpack something that massive? I mean, we're talking about a civilization that flourished thousands of years ago.
Well, luckily we have these incredible texts, the
Right,
Vedas.
the Vedas. They're more than just books, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of them as a combination of hymns, prayers, rituals, even philosophical musings, a real mix.
It sounds almost like a blueprint for life in ancient India.
In many ways it was. The Vedas offer us a glimpse into their beliefs, their values, their entire worldview.
So let's talk rituals. The Vedas are full of them. What can we learn from, say, the fire sacrifices? Were they all about appeasing the gods?
It's more nuanced than that. Take Agni, the god of fire. He was seen as a messenger between the human and divine realms.
So fire was like a spiritual telephone line,
Exactly. It was about connecting with the cosmos, communicating with a higher power. And these rituals weren't just personal, they were deeply social too.
which brings us to the Varna system. 4 groups: priests, warriors, merchants, and laborers. How rigid was this system, according to the Vedas?
That's where it gets interesting. It's actually more fluid than the caste system we often associate with India today.
Really? So how did they see it back then?
Well, the Purusha Sukta hymn describes these 4 varnas emerging from the body of a cosmic being. The head became the Brahmins, the priests, arms, the Kshatriyas, the warriors, and so on.
So each part of society having its own role, all interconnected, but not necessarily fixed from birth.
Right. Early Vedic texts even mention individuals shifting between varnas based on skills or actions.
It's fascinating how these seeds of thought evolved over time. But the Vedas weren't just about rituals and social structure, were they? There's a whole philosophical side, too.
Absolutely. We find these hymns pondering life, death, the nature of reality, really deep questions.
The big what's it all about questions, right?
Exactly. And unlike some religions with fixed doctrines, the Vedas are more exploratory. We see concepts like dharma, often translated as duty or righteous living.
So less about blind obedience and more about living a life of purpose.
Yes. And then there's karma, the idea that actions have consequences, shaping not just this life, but future ones too.
It's like every choice we make creates ripples that keep going. And the goal was moksha, right? Liberation from this cycle of birth and death.
Yes, transcending our limitations, merging with the ultimate reality, Brahman. It's incredible how relevant these ideas still are today.
It's like they tapped into something universal about the human experience.
Mhm.
And these Vedic ideas didn't just influence philosophy, they shaped art, literature, music.
Absolutely. Think of epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana.
Those are like pillars of Indian literature.
Yeah.
How do they tie back to the Vedic period?
They draw heavily on Vedic themes, characters, narratives. They're building upon that foundation.
It's like adding new layers of meaning and interpretation to those ancient stories. It's clear the Vedic era is woven into the fabric of Indian culture.
It truly is. And what's even more fascinating is how this legacy intersects with the arrival of, well, new forces on the Indian subcontinent.
You mean the East India Company? Talk about a culture clash, a trading company bumping into an ancient civilization.
And that encounter, with all its complexities and contradictions, that's where we'll pick up next time. So picture this. The East India Company, sailing into India expecting, well, easy pickings. But what they found was a civilization with systems of governance and law and social structures that have been around for centuries.
Talk about a surprise. This wasn't some, blank slate for them to just take over.
Exactly. And to try and wrap their heads around it, they came up with this idea of the ancient constitution.
Ancient constitution. Okay, break that down for me. What were they getting at?
Well, they realized India had this long history of governing itself, rooted in those very Vedic ideas we talked about.
So it wasn't just about the Mughals who were in power then.
Right. The Mughals were just the most recent layer. The British were looking for something deeper, a sort of inherent Indian way of ruling that went way back.
So in a way, they were admitting that India had its own legitimate system, not some chaos waiting to be fixed.
Yes, and this ancient constitution became a powerful tool. They used it to justify their own actions, saying they were just restoring something that had fallen apart.
Clever, huh? We're not conquerors, we're restorers. But did they really understand this ancient constitution?
That's the big question. And the truth is, it was messy. Their understanding was often through their own lens, their own biases.
A classic case of lost in translation, maybe.
You could say that. And one area where this clash really showed was in land ownership.
Ah, land. Always a source of power and wealth. How'd the company try to fit their ideas into the existing system?
They focused on the zamindars, these local landholders who collected taxes for the Mughals. The British saw them as key to their own money-making plans.
But the zamindars weren't just tax collectors, were they? They had social roles, judicial roles, all sorts of responsibilities in their communities.
Exactly. But the company, with their simplified view, often ignored that. They tried to force a very Western model of land ownership onto a system that was much more organic.
Trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Pretty much. And it caused friction. Zamindars resented the limits on their power, and the peasants were caught in the middle.
Sounds like a recipe for trouble. Did the company just not see it coming?
Though they might have underestimated the complexities, they relied a lot on Persian documents, interpretations from Indian officials who might have had their own agendas.
Like a game of telephone, where the message changes with each whisper.
Exactly. And the stakes were high, not just for Indians, but for the company itself. Back in Britain, rumors of corruption and abuse were growing.
Makes sense. This powerful company operating so far away with little oversight, bound to raise some eyebrows.
And those eyebrows went even higher when company officials started returning to Britain, while incredibly wealthy.
Oh, right. The infamous nabobs, living like kings off their Indian fortunes.
Not a good look. It didn't fit the image of noble Englishmen serving the empire.
Not at all. It fueled critics like Edmund Burke, who saw the company as this corrupting force, exploiting India for its own gain.
And these criticisms went beyond just morals. They tapped into British anxieties about their empire, the balance of power, what it even meant to be British.
So you've got this clash of ideologies, the company defending its actions, and critics like Burke demanding accountability. Sounds like a powder keg.
And that powder keg exploded with the impeachment trial of Warren Hastings.
Hastings, the Governor-General of Bengal, the poster child for both the ambition and the controversy of the East India Company. What a setting for this battle to play out.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. We're going from ancient texts to a courtroom showdown that captivated the nation.
All right, we're back. It's 1788. Picture it. Westminster Hall, packed. All eyes are on Warren Hastings, the former Governor-General of Bengal, on trial.
It was a spectacle, the who's who of British society, all there to see if Hastings would be held accountable for what happened in India.
But this wasn't just about one man, was it? This trial, it felt like it was about something bigger.
Oh, absolutely. It was a clash of visions, really.
How about?
About empire, about Britain's role in the world, even about what it meant to be British.
So Hastings, he was defending his record, saying everything he did was to keep things stable, keep order in India.
Right. And he was leaning hard on that ancient constitution idea, saying he understood Indian traditions, that his policies were in everyone's best interest, Britain and India.
But his critics, they saw it differently, right?
Totally. They called him a tyrant, someone who profited by exploiting India.
Strong words. Who was leading that charge?
Edmund Burke. He was a powerful voice against Hastings, painted him as this greedy, ambitious figure who'd abandoned all sense of justice.
And the accusations were serious, right?
Yeah.
We're talking corruption, warmongering, even mistreatment of, what was it, the Begums of Oud?
Yes. Two very wealthy noblewomen. It was a scandal all over the newspapers.
It's like a Shakespearean drama playing out in real life. So how'd Hastings fight back against all this?
He insisted his actions were necessary to protect the company, to protect British interests. He claimed he respected Indian customs, but had to make tough choices.
Two sides, two stories. Who did the public believe?
Public opinion was split right down the middle. Some saw Hastings as a hero who expanded Britain's reach, brought in wealth. Others, they saw him as the face of imperial corruption.
7 years this trial went on. 7 years. So what was the verdict in the end?
Well, Hastings was acquitted on all charges.
Was he won? Cleared his name.
Legally, yes. But it was what they call a Pyrrhic victory.
Meaning?
It cost him. His reputation was tarnished, and the trial exposed just how flawed the company's rule was. People saw the potential for abuse, the moral gray areas.
They're like pulling back the curtain, seeing what's really going on.
Exactly. And the calls for reform got louder. The government started paying more attention to what the company was doing, realizing they couldn't just turn a blind eye.
That ancient constitution idea, it lost its shine, didn't it?
It did. The realities of colonial rule were just too complex, too messy to be explained away so easily.
This trial, It feels like it marks a turning point.
It does. It sparked a debate about how Britain should wield its power, what responsibilities came with empire.
So we started this deep dive with the Vedas, the foundation of so much in Indian thought and culture. And now we end with a trial that shows how that collided with British colonialism. Full circle in a way.
It is. And it shows how even ideas from thousands of years ago can have these ripple effects, shaping events centuries later. The Vedic era, with its emphasis on dharma, karma, the pursuit of knowledge, it's still part of India's identity.
And this colonial period, with all its complications,
Yeah.
that's something we're still grappling with the effects of, even today.
We are. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From rituals and social structures to courtroom drama and the very nature of empire.
We've unpacked a lot. But of course, there's always more to explore, right? How did British rule change after the Hastings trial? What about the Indian perspective on all this? How did all these forces shape the India we know today?
All good questions. But those are for another deep dive. For now, we hope you've enjoyed joining us on this one. Keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep diving deep.